Hey guys, our lesson this week involves graphing circles. So last week you practiced writing the equation for circles or finding the radius and diameter from a graph. This week you're actually going to get to graph it. Yay! So let's take a look at this first example. X squared plus y squared equals 64. Alright, so let's go over the entire circle equation before we actually get started. So remember, it's x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals radius squared. Your hk creates your center. So if I just have x squared plus y squared, that means my center would be at 0, 0. Because I haven't added or subtracted anything, I haven't moved left or right any, because x minus 0 squared would just be x, and then y minus 0 squared would just be y. So I would still just be at 0, 0. And anytime you just see an x squared or a y squared, that automatically tells you that that coordinate, either x or y, would be at 0. Okay, moving on to the radius. I know the radius squared equals 64. Well, I want to figure out what just one radius is, not what radius squared. So if I know radius squared equals 64, then that would mean my radius would just have to be the square root of 64. So I would take the square root of 64, and that would give me 8. So on your IXL, you would plot your center at 0, 0, and then you would just move the circumference, like the outer edge of your circle, to 8. Okay, my program does not let me do a perfect circle. Probably does, but I haven't figured out how to do it yet. So I'm just going to attempt to draw a perfect circle. Ooh, that was beautiful. And we're going to call that good. All right, moving on to the next example. All right, so for this one, we're graphing x minus 8 squared plus y squared equals 4. Let me just go ahead and write that out. Not in red. Alright, so if I want to find the center, I need to look at the h and the k. Alright, also remember that if I just have a y squared by itself, that means that my y coordinate was at 0. So my center would have to be at 8, 0. So let's go ahead and plot that, 8, 0. And I'll write it up here too if you need to go back and look. Alright, so then for the radius, we're just taking the square root of this last number, 4. So the square root of 4 is 2. So now my equation would have to equal 2 squared, which would just be 4. So my radius would be 2. Alright, so then I would go 2 units over, draw my circle, and we can go on to the next example. Alright, so for this one, we're graphing the circle at x minus 4 squared plus y plus 2 squared equals 9. So start with your center. I know my center would be at 4 and negative 2. Remember, it's always opposite of what it looks like in your equation. So my center would be at 4, negative 2. If we need to see y, I'll write it out here down at the bottom again, just so that we're clear as to why it's 4, negative 2. So if I plug in 4 for my h and then negative 2 for my k, I would still get x minus 4 squared plus y minus a negative would turn that into a positive. So anytime you have a negative coordinate, when you plug it into the equation, it ends up becoming a positive. So my center would be at positive 4, negative 2. So I'd go to 4, negative 2, and plot that. Please make sure when you're plotting these to not mess up just plotting your points on your coordinate grid. Okay, make sure that you're plotting your x first and then your y, and pay attention to those signs. All right, now for the radius. take the square root of 9, and the square root of 9 is 3, so now my radius would have to be 3. This would equal 3 squared, which would be 9, so I would go over 3 units for my radius, and it would pop up a nice pretty circle, just like that. And let's move on to the next example. Okay, this one they threw in a decimal, because why not? Just make it extra fun. I need to start once again by finding the center. So because the x doesn't have anything added or subtracted to it, I know that it's going to be at 0. And then my y-coordinate would be at -5.5. Remember, it's opposite of what it looks like. So I would go to 0, -5.5, and they will let you do a halfway point on here. So -4, -5, and then I'd go halfway in between it. And now let's look at the radius. So I need to take the square root of my last term, my last number, and the square root of 1 is 1, so my radius would just be 1 unit. Alright, so this would be a little bit trickier on your IXL, not so much from left to right, because I can go over a full unit to my left or right, and I think on there it'll pop up the circle for you, so it should be a lot easier. Just make sure that it goes a complete full unit up and then a complete full unit down. So it looks something like that. Alright, moving on to the last example. Last circle we're going to graph together. Let's start by finding the center. So my center would be at +0.5, +1/2, and -5. So I would go to +0.5 and then down to -5. Alright, now let's look at the radius. I need to take the square root of my last number, which again is 1. So I know the square root of 1 is 1. So my radius would be 1 unit. So I'll just go 1 complete unit over, which would be at 1.5. And draw that circle. Alright, feel free to call or text me if you have any questions on this assignment. I hope you guys have a great week, and I will talk to you soon.